Gina, we've known each other a long time. And as you know, I'm a huge fan of your work from when you led EPA to your great work at Harvard after that, and now with the NRDC Action Fund. And, I'm always excited when we have the chance to get together and visit, but I'm especially excited right now to be able to talk with you virtually because, as you might have heard, there's an election coming up. And not only is it near and coming up, it's happening right now because people are voting early and voting by mail.
Mr. Gore, first of all, let me tell you how excited I am to be here with you. As you know, for as long as I've known you, you've been my hero and you never fail me. This is about the most important election that I think I've ever faced, and I'm sure you agree as well. This is important because it's about our values, about who we are and what we want to be as a country. And it's literally about the future that we want to hand to our children. And right now, we're grappling with this horrendous pandemic. We're facing systemic racial injustice that we just haven't yet grappled with, and we need to. And we have now record unemployment to top it off. And then you add climate change into the mix, and climate change is like a steroid. It makes all of these problems worse over time. And so, if we really want to make a change in the world, and we really want to resolve these issues, and we want to have a future we can be proud of, the most important thing that we can do is to vote. Our leadership is looking to literally deny science and trying to convince us that everything is just okay and the pandemic is not that bad and it's going to go away. And we know none of these things are true. So we need to vote for leaders that actually pay attention to science. We need to go back to where we were before and actually use real evidence to make decisions, because it's incredibly important for us right now to have everybody go out and vote, literally, to save our kids' future. And so hopefully we can all work together and get out and vote and get out early. And we can make sure that the leaders we vote for, not just a president, but leaders at all levels of government, understand that we're done with the world as we're currently living in. We need a future we can be proud of, a future that will keep us healthy and safe, a future that will tackle our climate crisis. That's what we need, and that's what we can get if we vote. Mr. Vice President, as someone who has been leading the charge for the climate movement, so how do you feel about where we are right now? Where do you think we need to go next?
Well, unfortunately, the consequences and the impacts of the climate crisis are still getting worse faster than we are mobilizing the solutions for the climate crisis. But we are definitely gaining momentum. I'll give you a quick example. 5 years ago, electricity produced by wind and solar was cheaper than electricity produced from fossil fuels in only 1% of the world. But 5 years later, right now, it's cheaper in 2/3 of the world. And 5 years from now, it's going to be cheaper in 100% of the world, as Japan and Southeast Asia and the few areas that haven't already crossed that threshold do. And also, I really think we are crossing the so-called political tipping point right about now. We are seeing young people lead the way. We're seeing people listen to Mother Nature and recognize the dangers that we are facing now. And I think that the extra momentum that we're seeing is going to continue. And I think the market forces that have brought down the cost of renewable energy and electric vehicles and batteries and regenerative agriculture and all of these other solutions, I think that progress is going to continue. But the one thing that can make the most difference is this election. But let me ask you another question. Right now, we're going through one of the most devastating wildfire seasons that we've ever had, with the West Coast covered in this apocalyptic smoke and haze, and it looks like nighttime at noon in the areas where the soot and the smoke has covered up the air. And of course, it's such a tragic situation for those who've lost loved ones and lost homes, and our prayers are with them. But at the same time that the wildfires are out of control, we're seeing one of the most active hurricane seasons in recorded history, with one storm after another battering the Gulf Coast and the Southeast. So how does the election factor into this? As someone who has been in charge of the EPA and set environmental rules for the nation, what can the government and the leaders we elect in this election do to help prevent more of these catastrophes in the future and protect our future?
Well, the good news is that they can do a lot. We have to prevent this sort of endless spiral that we're seeing with the wildfires and the floods and the droughts. And we cannot let it get worse. The time is now when we need leaders who are going to act. So the very most important thing that anyone can do today, if they want to tackle the climate crisis, is to vote. Vote, vote, vote. I don't care if you vote by mail or you go to the polls that day, but you have to vote. Because if you don't, we could lose our one opportunity we have to jumpstart and turbocharge clean energy. You know why? Because that's what leaders do. They don't look at the spiral of devastation and do nothing. They act, and they do it in a way that's going to make renewable energy like solar and wind available to everyone. They're going to look at the clean cars, the electric vehicles that will get rid of the pollution that is contaminating so many communities. And the one most important thing that we can think about in leaders is to actually understand that there have been communities left behind, and we can, in all these solutions, we can center equity. We can make sure that the Black and brown communities that have been left behind, the indigenous community, the poor, who have been left out of the benefits that most of us have been lucky enough to share, get a fair shot at a healthy life. And they're also the ones most in the crosshairs of our climate crisis, and they need to be protected. So I know you're afraid. I know you're worried about the endless spiral of climate change. But let me tell you this. We have solutions that are cost effective. We can grow jobs with those solutions at amounts that we have not seen before in our history. And we can make this the time when we vote for leadership that brings us the future that we want and protects ourselves today. That's what we can do, and that's what voting will bring to the table for all of us. Okay, let me ask you another question. Do other nations still have faith that the United States takes climate change seriously?
Well, it's a great question, Gina. And actually, I think the answer in part is going to be given in this upcoming election. And I say that for this reason. I think that many people in other nations around the world see the same reality that some of us do here in the United States, and that is that these past 4 years have caused a lot of damage to the confidence the rest of the world has in U.S. leadership, and in simple things like whether or not the U.S. leadership believes in science or just gives in to whatever the lobbyists for the polluters want them to do. So confidence in U.S. leadership, as I've said, has been shaken, no question about that. We've seen the reports of how friends of the U.S. around the world are kind of shaking their heads and wondering what in the world has been going on in the U.S. And some of our adversaries have been kind of licking their chops, so to speak. But that is something that elections can change. And one reason it can change is young people. And so let me ask you another question. I see young people really engaged in fighting the climate crisis with a lot more passion and dedication than a lot of others. And I've seen them do it in ways that I've never seen before. I've seen the numbers of Americans that are saying, let's act on climate, grow and grow. And by the way, if you look at the number of Americans under the age of 39, that group makes up 37% of eligible voters, making those young people the largest, the most diverse, and potentially the most powerful bloc of voters in the country. But at the same time, I also hear some of those young people express disillusionment, and some people kind of shrug their shoulders when it comes to the election. So I'm sure you've encountered this from time to time. So what do you say to someone who sees all the challenges we face, from the climate crisis to the racial injustice to the COVID pandemic, and doesn't feel they need to vote? Who doesn't feel that their voice matters, and what do you say to them to change their minds?
Well, I think, Mr. Gore, that it's really important that we do a couple of things. One, reassure them that it's not too late. You know, when you look at those Martian-like red glows in the air in the West Coast, you can understand that young people might think, okay, the worst is already coming. But we know it's not too late. If we pay attention to the science and we make sure that we vote for leadership that does the same, that we focus on evidence to make decisions, then we can get out of this pandemic. We can get out of this climate crisis that we're facing. And the second thing is that, you know, I don't want them to get discouraged about government. You know, I've heard a lot of young people say to me, oh, what's the use? Government is terrible. That doesn't do anything. I'll tell you, there have been a number of companies and individuals and areas of this country that would like you to think that that's true, but it's not. And if you start thinking that your voice doesn't matter, then guess what? It will be silenced by the people that really need to hear it. So get out and vote. Government does work for the people if you vote for leaders who care about us and will help work for us. Look, I couldn't be more inspired by young people. You know, I'm 66. I'm not going to tell you that it's up to you, because I'm still going to be hanging in there with you. And so you know that you can carry the day. Look at what you did with the climate youth strike. Look at the Sunrise Movement. Look at all the young people that are standing up and telling us that we're not doing what we need to do and they're going to do it. Well, go ahead. But the first thing you need to do is make sure you're registered to vote and you have a plan. And if you're worried about how to get updates on this and how to do it, make sure that you text climate 2020 to 21333, and you'll be able to get updates, and you'll be able to access plans that will help you to make sure you vote and your vote is heard. We need the youth to lead us, and we're going to be right behind you and hopefully in front of you every step of the way. So let me go back to you, Mr. Gore, and tell you that America is just now beginning to reckon with the structural systemic racism that has plagued us since slavery. You know that, and I know that. And it's about time we addressed it. So we both know the impacts of climate change and pollution are experienced, again, most acutely by people of color, especially low income and working class people of color. So how can we link the fight for environmental justice to the broader fight for racial justice in a way that strengthens both?
Well, that's a great question, Gina, and thank you for asking it. One thing, both the COVID-19 pandemic and the climate crisis have both revealed the stark inequities that were pre-existing before the pandemic hit. In both cases, the climate crisis and the pandemic are having a much harsher impact on Black people, on Hispanic people, on Indigenous people, on low-income communities. Now, why would that be? There are several reasons. First of all, these communities have been deprived of the sufficient political and economic clout to defend themselves. And so Black people are much more likely to live downwind from the smokestacks or downstream from the hazardous waste flows. Black and brown and Indigenous people are much less likely to have good access to quality health care. In many cases, the housing available has been redlined away. The jobs that are available are less likely to be those kinds of jobs that you can suddenly switch into virtual jobs. And another factor that is really stark and clear, family wealth. That captures the legacy of racism. It's shocking to look at the numbers and realize that the average black family is so different in family wealth from the average white family that it takes 11 and a half average black families to make up the family wealth of one average white family. So the struggle for racial justice and for equity and environmental justice has to be at the heart of the effort against the climate crisis. And where the pandemic is concerned, it's also crucially important to recognize that the medical authorities are now telling us that the pollution that comes from burning fossil fuels is not only the CO2 that causes the climate crisis, but the particulate pollution that some people call conventional air pollution. And that's now recognized as a precondition for higher death rates under COVID-19. And so for all these factors, you have a death rate for Black Americans from COVID-19 that is 2.2 times higher than that for white Americans. You look at the counties in America that have much more than average Black population compared to those that have more than average white population, the death rate is 3 times higher. Even before the pandemic, Black children were getting infected with asthma 3 times more frequently than white children. And if you look at the death rate from asthma, 10 times higher for Black children than white children. So these issues are connected intimately. And I actually think that this great awakening that put so many millions of people out in the streets after the George Floyd murder, it has become a kind of a broader general awakening. And the young generation in particular is demanding a better world. So that's the way I would answer that. And it makes me think back to when I was a young person. And I want to ask you this question. When you're a good deal younger than I am, but when you and I were voting for the first time, it used to be that you just went down to your local polling station on election day, cast your ballot, and went home to wait for the results. Now we know that with the pandemic and the incredible interest and explosion in the ability to vote by mail, it's a little more elaborate. It's not really election day anymore. It's election season. And however we vote, whether it's heading down to the polling place on the day of the election and doing it in person, or whether it's filling out a ballot and sending it in in the mail, whatever it is, we have to make a careful plan so that our vote is certain to be counted. You know the ins and outs of voting, and you know how it's changed. So what are you telling people about what they have to do in order to ensure that their voices are heard and their votes are counted in 2020?
Well, I think the first thing we have to tell them is to talk to their friends and neighbors about voting. I can remember the first time I voted in a presidential election. I was so excited. I went to my high school auditorium, and it was filled with people, and I went home, I went to sleep, and in the morning I knew who won. Well, it's just not the same anymore. Now, voting is still secure. You can still vote, and you should vote, and you have to vote. But you have to understand that there are a lot of folks out there that even some in leadership who are trying to convince you, first of all, that your vote won't matter. We've talked about this endlessly. It does matter. It's the only thing that matters right now if you want to tackle the climate crisis, is to get out and vote. But there's ways in which you can vote that make it easy, but you have to have a plan. So you have to first recognize that you can vote by mail, and those who are trying to tell you that it's not secure or it's your vote will not be counted, there is no evidence to support that. So you can vote by mail. You either can have some ballots are sent right directly to your home. If it's not, you can ask to have one sent to your home. Make sure you figure out which it is and get that ballot in your hand so you can have it in on time, or you can go to the polls. And the polls may be crowded and you may be waiting in a long line, but don't worry if it turns to be the end of the time when you're supposed to be voting already, like 8 o'clock, you'll still be able to vote. It is absolutely your to vote if you're in line on time, so don't leave that line. But the most important thing that you have to remember is that voting is just not your right, but it is your civic duty. And you want to make sure that you can take care of your health and your future and your well-being. And you need to vote in order to make sure that you have the leaders at every level of government that will protect you and keep you safe and keep your future healthy for your kids. But remember, even before you vote, make sure that you talk to everybody. Remind them to have a plan, to get their vote in. Mailing votes is just fine. Being at the polls should be safe. It's your right to be there. You'll get an opportunity to vote. And don't worry about the nonsense you're hearing or the people that are trying to stop you from voting or tell you that your vote won't count, because we still live in the United States of America, and that's part of our democracy. So get out, get voting. And let me turn it back to you, Mr. Gore, because I have another question. In the lead up to this election, we've seen unprecedented attacks on our democracy. I mentioned a few. What kinds of reforms would you like to see our democratic systems going forward that would ensure the integrity of our elections and reduce disenfranchisement?
Well, another great question and a very timely one also. Uh, for one thing, we have got to stop all this voter intimidation and voter suppression. This is a very cynical exercise to try to prevent people from voting. It used to be in the last century, it was not uncommon to have black people forced to answer ridiculous questions, as the late John Lewis told the story about his parents being asked how many bubbles in a bar of soap. And it was just an excuse to come up with some reason to deny people access to the ballot box. Well, they're more sophisticated in the way they go about it right now, but it needs to stop. The Voting Rights Act passed in 1965 was a step forward, but the Supreme Court just took some of that law away, and we've seen the abuses rise up again. So that needs to be changed. We need to make it even easier for people to vote. You know, you hear this stuff about voter fraud. Republican and Democratic experts alike who really specialize in this, they all tell us it's so infinitesimally rare, 0.0003% and less. And every time it does happen, which is very rare, they catch it because you got a paper trail. And in any case, we need to reform that. But one of the issues that will be decided by this election is whether or not we will have the ability to reform the voting process. So get out there and vote. And if you vote in person, don't forget to wear a mask and wash your hands and be careful in the process. Everybody knows that by now, but don't forget to do that. I'm very hopeful that we're going to see a huge turnout. But to turn it back to you, Gina, what gives you the most hope right now? What are you seeing around you that gives you a feeling that it's time to be optimistic and hopeful?
Well, let me tell you what gives me the most hope. A couple of things. One is young people, because they are active, they're engaged, they're excited, they are inspirational, and they are nipping at the heels of old dudes like me. And I love every minute of us. They're going to challenge us, they're going to push us. And frankly, we need that. The other thing that gives me hope is I have two grandchildren, and I look at their eyes and I know that they're going to be smarter, healthier, and better prepared than I ever will to meet the challenges of the future. So if we give them that opportunity, then we are going to have a wonderful chance to see them shine. That's what it's all about. That's why we're working so hard. And I am just hopeful that if we get out and vote, we can stop this spiral that we're in today. We can once again go hang outside because the pandemic will be gone. We can get rid of those fiery skies and understand how we can help one another and bring our country back together again. And that's exactly what we're going to do. And we're going to start by voting.
Gina, it is always great to talk with you, and I want to thank you for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedule to talk today. Before we go, I have one last question for you. You and
Go
I
for it.
both know that climate change is on the ballot this fall. Do you have a plan to vote? What's your plan to vote?
Well, I have a plan to vote. I am going to vote by mail, and I'm going to get my vote in, and it is going to count. And for anyone who doesn't have a plan to vote yet, go to text climate 2020 at 21333.
I also have a plan to vote. My plan is to vote early and to send it in by mail. And I'm then going to sit back and, well, I'm going to keep working to try to get other people to vote until the election day, until they close the polls. But then I'm going to watch carefully at the outcome with a great deal of hope and optimism. So thank you very much for doing this event together, Gina. And to everybody out there, if you didn't get the bottom line that we're trying to convey in this message, it's this. It's incredibly important for you to vote. So make a plan to vote. Get out there and vote. Vote by mail. Take somebody else to vote. Make sure you're registered if you're not, because it's never been more important for everybody to vote. All right.
That was really funny at the end. Yeah. Did we say vote enough?